6:47 a.m. Central European Time this morning, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz walked into the Bundestag, stood at the podium, and detonated the most consequential economic bomb dropped on the United States since the Arab oil embargo of 1973. No warning, no leaked drafts, no diplomatic back channels, one speech, 41 minutes. And by the time he finished, the entire post-war economic order that the United States has relied on for 80 years was on fire. Here is what you need to understand right now. What Germany announced this morning is not a tariff dispute. It is not a trade negotiation. It is a full architectural restructuring of Europe's economic relationship with the United States. And if it is implemented, and every indication says it will be, the American economy will lose its single most important advantage on the global stage, the dollar's dominance. Because what Friedrich Merz announced this morning is that Germany, in coordination with France, the Netherlands, and 11 other EU member states, is launching a parallel financial settlement system that allows international trade to bypass the US dollar entirely. They are calling it the European Sovereign Exchange Mechanism, ESEM. And the moment those letters hit the wire services, the US dollar index dropped faster than it has at any point since 2008. This is the moment the rest of the world stopped asking for permission. In this breakdown, I am going to walk you through exactly what Merz announced and why each component is designed to surgically remove American financial leverage from the global system. I am going to show you the 4 receipts that prove this was not spontaneous, but was planned for months behind Washington's back. I am going to reveal who else has already signed on to this system and why the list of countries will terrify the U.S. Treasury Department. I am going to explain the White House reaction and why their response tells you they were caught completely flat-footed. And I am going to give you 3 scenarios for what the global economy looks like 6 months from now, depending on how Washington responds. Subscribe to join the community. Leave a comment so we can keep the conversation going. And share this video because what I am about to lay out will not be covered with this level of detail anywhere in mainstream media. Let me walk you through Merz's speech because it was structured like a legal indictment of American economic policy. He opened with history. He said, "For 80 years, Germany has been the most loyal economic partner the United States has ever had. We rebuilt our nation under the protection of the American security umbrella. We integrated our economy with the transatlantic system. We held American dollars as the foundation of our reserves. We trusted that the system was built on rules, on reciprocity, and on mutual benefit." He paused. That trust has been destroyed. Merz then laid out what he called the 3 betrayals. First, the unilateral imposition of tariffs on German automobiles, steel, and manufactured goods in violation of WTO rules and without any prior negotiation. Second, the weaponization of the SWIFT financial system to threaten European companies that do business with countries the United States disapproves of, forcing European firms to choose between American markets and their own strategic interests. Third, and this is the one that got the loudest reaction in the chamber, the freezing of Russian central bank assets held in Western financial institutions, which Merz described not as a defense of Russia, but as a precedent that proves the United States can and will seize any country's financial assets if it decides that country is an adversary. Merz said, "If the United States can freeze Russia's reserves today, it can freeze Germany's reserves tomorrow. If it can sanction European companies for trading with Iran, it can sanction European companies for trading with China. The dollar is no longer a neutral medium of exchange. It is a weapon, and Germany will not allow its economy to remain dependent on a weapon that can be turned against us at any moment." The Bundestag was silent. Merz continued, "Therefore, effective today, Germany and 13 partner nations are launching the European Sovereign Exchange Mechanism. ESEM is a financial settlement system that allows bilateral and multilateral trade to be conducted in euros, yuan, yen, or a basket of non-dollar currencies. It operates on independent infrastructure that is not subject to American regulatory oversight, American sanctions enforcement, or American political pressure." He then outlined 4 pillars of the system. Pillar 1, independent payment infrastructure. ESEM operates on a new interbank messaging and settlement platform that is completely separate from SWIFT. Transactions processed through ESEM cannot be monitored, blocked or sanctioned by any entity outside the participating nations. The platform was built over the past 14 months in partnership with the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, and the People's Bank of China. Pillar 2, currency diversification of reserves. All 14 participating nations will begin immediately reducing their holdings of U.S. Treasury securities and diversifying reserves into euros, gold, yuan, and a new ESM-denominated bond. Germany alone holds $86 billion in U.S. Treasuries. The combined holdings of all 14 nations exceed $1.4 trillion. Those holdings will be reduced by a minimum of 40% over the next 24 months. Pillar 3, trade settlement in non-dollar currencies. All trade between SM member nations will be settled in local currencies or the ESM basket. This applies to energy, manufactured goods, agricultural products, and services. The goal is to reduce dollar-denominated trade among member nations from the current 58% to below 15% within 3 years. Pillar 4, reciprocal defense against economic coercion. ESM includes a mutual defense clause. If any member nation is subjected to unilateral sanctions, tariffs, or financial restrictions by the United States, all member nations will collectively retaliate with equivalent measures against American exports and American financial interests. An attack on one is an attack on all. Merz closed this section by saying, "This is not an act of aggression. This is an act of self-defense. The United States has weaponized the global financial system. We are simply building a system that cannot be weaponized against us." Now, let me give you the receipts, because the evidence shows this was not a reaction to a single event. This was a strategic operation executed with military precision. Receipt number 1, the secret Frankfurt meeting. 3 months ago, central bank governors from 14 nations met in Frankfurt under the cover of a routine European central bank policy symposium. According to sources who have now confirmed the details, the actual agenda was the finalization of the ESM architecture. The meeting lasted 3 days. Representatives from China, Japan, South Korea, India, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia attended as observers. The United States was not informed. The United States was not invited. The United States did not know this meeting occurred until this morning. That means for 3 months, America's closest economic allies were building a system designed to neutralize American financial power, and Washington had no idea. Receipt number 2. The gold repatriation. Over the past 8 months, Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, and France have quietly repatriated a combined 370 tons of gold from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Those transfers were conducted in small shipments to avoid triggering alarm. The gold is now held in domestic vaults in Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Vienna, and Paris. This is not speculation. The Bundesbank confirmed the transfers in a statement released 30 minutes after Merz's speech. You do not move 370 tons of gold out of New York unless you are preparing for a scenario in which you no longer trust the United States to safeguard your assets. Receipt number 3, the Japan commitment. Within 2 hours of Merz's speech, Japanese Prime Minister Yoshida held a press conference in Tokyo. He confirmed that Japan is a founding member of ESM and will begin redirecting trade settlement away from the dollar immediately. Japan holds $1.08 trillion in U.S. Treasury securities, the largest foreign holding in the world. Yoshida said Japan will reduce those holdings by 35% over the next 18 months. Japan, America's most important ally in Asia, the country the United States rebuilt after World War II, the country that has held more American debt than any nation on earth. Japan just announced it is dumping over $375 billion in U.S. Treasuries. That is not a crack in the foundation. That is the foundation splitting in half. Receipt number 4, the Saudi signal. Saudi Arabia did not make a public statement, but according to 3 separate diplomatic sources, the Saudi Finance Ministry sent a private communication to the ESM founding members confirming that Saudi Arabia will begin accepting non-dollar payment for oil exports to ESM members within 90 days. Let me say that again. Saudi Arabia, the country whose agreement to price oil exclusively in dollars created the petrodollar system in 1974, is preparing to accept euros, yuan, and SM basket currencies for oil. The petrodollar, the single most important pillar of American financial dominance for 50 years, is being dismantled right now. while you are watching this video. Now let me show you what happened in Washington, because the reaction tells you everything about how unprepared the United States was for this. At 7:15 a.m. Eastern, the National Security Council was briefed. According to sources, senior officials initially believed the reports were exaggerated. By 8 a.m., when the full text of Mertz's speech was translated and distributed, the reaction shifted to what one official described as controlled panic. At 8:30 a.m., markets opened. The dollar index dropped 3.7% in the first hour of trading. U.S. Treasury yields spiked as traders anticipated massive foreign selling. The Dow Jones fell 1,140 points by noon, a 4.6% decline. Bank stocks collapsed. J.P. Morgan fell 9%. Goldman Sachs fell 11%. Citigroup fell 14%. The market understood immediately what this means. If the dollar loses its reserve currency status, every American financial institution loses the structural advantage that has generated trillions in profit over the past 8 decades. At 10 a.m., the Treasury Secretary held an emergency call with Federal Reserve Chair Powell. According to sources, the discussion centered on whether the Fed would need to intervene in currency markets to defend the dollar. Powell reportedly said intervention would be ineffective against a coordinated institutional shift of this magnitude. At noon, the White House released a statement. It said, "The United States remains the anchor of the global financial system. Any attempt to create alternative systems will fail because no currency and no institution can match the depth, liquidity, and stability of the U.S. dollar and U.S. Treasury markets. We are confident that our allies will recognize that undermining the dollar undermines their own interests." That statement is denial, masquerading as confidence. It offers no countermeasure, no proposal, no acknowledgement that the world's most important economies just announced they are building a system specifically designed to reduce their dependence on the dollar. At 2 p.m., congressional leaders demanded a briefing. According to sources, the briefing was heated. Senators from both parties asked the Treasury Secretary why the administration had no intelligence that this was being planned. The Treasury Secretary had no answer. Senators asked what the administration's response plan was. There was no response plan. At 4 p.m., Trump held a press conference. He said, "Germany is making a big mistake, a very big mistake. They need us more than we need them. The dollar is the strongest currency in the world, and it always will be. If they want to play games, we can play games too. We have options they haven't even thought of." He did not specify what those options were. He did not announce any concrete action. He did not address the Japan announcement or the Saudi signal. He spoke for 6 minutes and took no questions. Now let me give you the psychological profile comparison, because it explains why Germany has the advantage. Friedrich Merz is a former corporate lawyer. He spent 2 decades at BlackRock, the world's largest asset management firm. He understands global financial architecture at a level that no one in the current White House can match. He does not operate on emotion. He operates on structural analysis. He identified the vulnerability, American dependence on foreign demand for dollars and treasuries, and he built a coalition to exploit that vulnerability. Trump operates on leverage and intimidation. That works when you are dealing with smaller economies that cannot absorb the cost of defiance. It does not work when you are dealing with a coalition that represents over 60% of global GDP and has spent months preparing for exactly this confrontation. Merz built a coalition in secret, launched it in public, and created a situation where the United States has no effective counter because the weapon being used against America is not a tariff or a sanction. It is an alternative. And you cannot sanction an alternative. You cannot tariff an alternative. You can only compete with it. And right now, the United States has no competitive response. Let me give you the economic consequences because the numbers are staggering. If ESIM is fully implemented, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that reduced foreign demand for U.S. treasuries will increase borrowing costs for the federal government by $340 billion per year. That is $340 billion that either gets added to the deficit or gets cut from federal programs. Reduced dollar usage in global trade means reduced demand for dollars, which means the dollar weakens. A weaker dollar means higher import prices. Higher import prices mean inflation. The Fed estimates that a sustained 15% decline in the dollar index would add 2.3 percentage points to annual inflation. Loss of financial system centrality means U.S. banks lose transaction fees, clearing fees, and the structural advantage of operating in the world's reserve currency. J.P. Morgan alone generates an estimated $18 billion per year from its position in the dollar-based global financial system. The total estimated cost to the U.S. economy over 5 years if ESM is fully implemented is between $4.2 trillion and $6.8 trillion. That is not a trade dispute. That is an economic restructuring that will reduce American living standards for a generation. Now, here are 3 scenarios for what happens next. Scenario 1. The reversal. Trump recognizes the severity of the threat and immediately begins negotiations to address the grievances that led to ESM's creation. Tariffs are removed. Swift weaponization is curtailed. The U.S. provides guarantees that foreign-held assets will not be seized for political purposes. ESM launches but remains small because the underlying grievances are resolved. The dollar retains its dominance, but with new constraints on how it can be used as a weapon. Probability, 15%. This requires Trump to publicly reverse policies he has described as essential to American strength. His personality and political incentives make this extremely unlikely. Scenario 2. The slow fracture. The U.S. refuses to negotiate. ESM launches and grows gradually. Over 3 to 5 years, dollar usage in global trade drops from 58% to 35%. The U.S. faces higher borrowing costs, higher inflation, and reduced financial sector profits. The transition is painful but manageable. The U.S. remains a major economic power, but loses its singular dominance. The world becomes multipolar financially as it has already become multipolar politically. Probability, 55%. This is the most likely outcome because it requires no dramatic action from either side and allows both to save face while the structural shift occurs gradually. Scenario 3. The acceleration. Trump retaliates with sanctions against ESM member nations. He freezes German, Japanese, and French assets held in the United States. He imposes secondary sanctions on any company that uses the ESM system. This confirms every fear that drove ESM's creation and accelerates adoption. Within 12 months, the dollar loses reserve currency status. The U.S. faces a sovereign debt crisis as foreign buyers abandon treasury auctions. Interest rates spike. The housing market collapses. The stock market enters a multi-year bear market. The United States faces the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Probability, 30%. This requires Trump to escalate in exactly the way that maximizes damage to the United States, which is consistent with his pattern of doubling down when challenged. I am watching 3 things over the next 72 hours. First, whether any additional countries publicly join ESM. Every new member increases the system's viability and reduces the dollar's dominance. Second, whether U.S. Treasury auction results show reduced foreign demand. If foreign buyers start pulling back immediately, the crisis accelerates. Third, whether Trump announces retaliatory measures or opens negotiations. The direction of his response in the next 3 days will determine which scenario we are heading toward. Germany did not just challenge the United States. Germany built an alternative to the United States. And once an alternative exists, dominance is no longer guaranteed. It is competed for. The dollar has been the most powerful weapon in America's arsenal for 80 years. This morning, the rest of the world announced they are building a shield. And Washington has no idea how to respond. The countdown to a new financial world order has begun.